Namaskar, hello and welcome viewers. You're watching this special presentation of Sansad TV, Bills and Insight, your one-stop destination for views, news and analysis of proposed legislations of India that have far-reaching implications and impact your life. I'm your host, KRITI MISHRA, and today the spotlight is on the Anti-Maritime Piracy Bill. The bill enables Indian authorities to take action against piracy in the high seas. Before the detailed analysis, let's take a look at the highlights of the bill. The bill brings into law the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It applies to the sea beyond the exclusive economic zone beyond 200 nautical miles from India's coastline. The bill defines piracy as an illegal act of violence, detention or destruction against a ship, aircraft, person or property for private purposes by the crew or passengers of a private ship or aircraft. So why did we need this bill? Well, piracy is an ancient problem that has plagued the world for many centuries. Acts of piracy threaten maritime security by endangering the welfare of people traveling by sea and the security of navigation and commerce. These acts may result in the loss of life, physical harm, hostage-taking, disruptions to commerce and navigation, and financial losses to ship owners. As per the International Maritime Organization, during 2018 and 2019, 84 acts of piracy were reported globally. In 1995, India ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which gives a uniform international legal framework for combating acts of piracy. India does not have a separate domestic legislation on piracy, and prosecution for piracy as a crime has not been included in the Indian Penal Code or the Code of Criminal Procedure. So the Anti-Maritime Piracy Bill 2019 was brought to improve the safety and security of Indian maritime trade as well as the safety of its crew members. And for deeper understanding of the bill and maritime security, I'm joined by an esteemed panel of guests. Joining us through virtual platform, Mr. P.P. Chaudhary, Chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, Vice Admiral Shekhar, Sinha, retired defence expert, and also in the studio we have with us Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador. And joining us, young and vibrant audience. I welcome all of you on Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us. And before we commence our discussion, let's take a look at the introduction of the bill in the Lok Sabha by External Affairs Minister S. Shekhar.
To introduce a bill to make special provisions for repression of piracy on high seas and to provide for punishment for the offence of piracy and for matters connected therewith on incidental thereto.
Let's understand how pirates operate. After 2008, a major spurt in piracy attacks was seen in the Gulf of Aden by pirates operating off the coast of Somalia. This region, which connects the Arabian Sea to the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea through the Suez Canal, has many important sea lanes for trade between Asia and Europe and east coast of Africa. With the enhanced naval presence in the Gulf of Aden, pirates shifted their areas of operations eastwards and southwards in the Indian Ocean, with numerous piracy attempts being reported off Seychelles and Mauritius. Some piracy incidents at that time were also reported towards the western coast of India. This was countered successfully by the Indian Navy and the Coast Guard, which enhanced their vigil and conducted major anti-piracy operations on the western coast of India. And Mr. Chaudhary, let me begin the program with you. The Parliamentary Committee headed by you said that the Ministry of External Affairs should make sincere efforts to enhance international cooperation on maritime piracy and also gave specific recommendations. Take us through the key observations and the suggestions of the committee, sir.
So far this bill is concerned, it was initially in view of this United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. It was in pursuant to that, it was conceived in 2011. And earlier the report was also submitted by the committee, but in 2012 and 2013 the bill was introduced again but could not be passed. And again the bill was introduced in 2019 and referred to the committee. Committee made certain important recommendations with respect to, because on this issue there is no clear law, no domestic law. And this is a region that earlier, then we can recollect this Alonda Rainbow case, where we were not having any domestic law because all the situations can't be dealt with under the Indian Penal Code. That is only with respect to the this robbery and all this. So the piracy was not covered under the Indian Penal Code, and this was considered proper and in view of the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea, which was adopted in 1982 and ratified by India in 1995. So it was considered proper that we have to frame a domestic law to deal with the high sea piracy, because it was the issue of the jurisdiction. So beyond this exclusive economic zone, in high sea, it was very difficult to deal with the pirates with respect to the domestic law. Therefore, the certain recommendations were made by the committee with respect to the bill. 2 recommendations with respect to the death penalty, and another recommendation, I think, with respect to trial in absentia. So these are apart from so many other recommendations, 2 recommendations are very, very important, that whether in absentia a person can be, this trial can be held. This we provided certain safeguard, because it can't be, because in view of the Supreme Court judgment and the principle of natural justice, the trial in absentia is not possible. Right. But since we have adopted a modality and to fine tune and provide the fine balance, we have provided the safeguard when the trial in absentia can be conducted, because this such type of this maritime anti-piracy bill is a very, very special enactment. And it is very difficult to prosecute and sentence the accused, because non-availability of the evidence, non-cooperation by the accused, there can be so many incidents and the issues. So therefore, instead of altogether removing, and then we have provided the certain safeguards should be there. And those safeguards, like that a person can be said to have been aware of the trial, but he is not cooperating and he is not attending. If a consulate took place in the trial, if their advocate is there, then there is no need of the person, he should be appear in person. And if they do not request an appeal in due time, and finally if they are offered an appeal, so therefore these are the safeguards, these are the sufficient safeguards. So the Supreme Court has struck down such a law, which is that trial in absentia was held. So these are the very, very peculiar situation. So we have provided the trial in absentia with certain safeguard. And so far the death penalty is concerned, that we have retained it, reason being that it should not be a mandatory, but it should be, it may be a lifetime imprisonment or death penalty. It is for the court to decide, because the piracy itself is a crime. So right. Therefore, we retained it, the death penalty, in a special and peculiar circumstances, and that is a very, very the special law which we can't equate with the law of the country, because the pirates, they act in the high sea. Therefore, in this availability of evidence, there are so many factors. Therefore, these recommendations have been made. Absolutely, so these are the very important recommendations in this bill.
Absolutely, sir. Those were the important recommendations that the Parliamentary Committee made to the Ministry of External Affairs, of course, for this important bill. But talking about the defense aspect, Admiral Sinha, as per International Maritime Organization, in the 11-year period from 1st of January 2009 to 15th of December 2019, there were 1,173 incidents of piracy. During the same period, over 500 Indians were captured by pirates around the world at various points of time. The bill was also introduced in Parliament just days after 18 Indians aboard a crude oil transport were abducted off the coast of Nigeria. Tell us about the significance of this bill for enhancing maritime security.
KRITI ji, thank you for getting me on your program. We had a massive problem of, getting them prosecuted. While we could capture, and in one case we sank the pirate boat. But, it took many years for the case to get finalized. Because the owners of the pirate boats, they started claiming compensation for having Navy having sunk their boat, and it had to go to ICJ, and the government had to fight the case for a very long time. As Honorable Chaudhary just mentioned, that there was a problem about jurisdiction, and our courts used to let them go because our laws did not sort of apply to people at high sea. Therefore, I think it's an extremely, extremely transformational law that now, if you catch a pirate in high seas, even beyond the exclusive economic zone, that is beyond 200 nautical miles, the naval ships and Coast Guard ships, the officers and sailors, they are authorized now to not only capture them and bring them to any Indian court anywhere in the country, and they can be tried and appropriate punishment can be given. I also must mention that these kind of laws are not existing in many countries in the world, and we may be one of the leading countries to promulgate this law. Unfortunately, from 2012, now we are into 2022. It has taken 10 years for it to be finally put it back to the Parliament after going through the standing committee. But the problem was that anywhere in the world, this jurisdiction problem has come to almost all cases.
Right.
And the United Nations was actually running prison in Kenya, where there were 120 pirates who were captured and kept there, not knowing under which law they should be tried because they were captured at high sea. So I think this law addresses that problem, and it gives enough leeway or powers to the naval and Coast Guard ships to arrest the pirates, and need not necessarily be of any origin, and he or she can be tried in any court in India. So I think it's very significant as far as bringing to justice, the pirates, and possibly their linkages with the some terrorist organizations.
Absolutely, sir. That's another important aspect. We'll just talk about it in a bit. But Ambassador Sajjanhar, the important point that, in fact, the Parliamentary Committee on External Affairs also made, that we need to enhance international cooperation. How do we do that? Enhancing international cooperation in combating maritime piracy.
Yeah, I think, again, thank you very much, KRITI, for having me on your program. Always a pleasure. So, when we are discussing this bill, I think two aspects that really need to be kept in mind, and I think they have been alluded to by the previous speakers also. One is the most significant aspect is the issue of jurisdiction, because beyond the 200 nautical mile from the coastline, there is no Indian law that is applicable. Right. I will just draw your attention to one particular instance. Of course, it's not the case of piracy, but in the case of piracy also it holds. You'd recall that two of our fishermen were killed off the coast of Kerala a few years ago by the Italian ship, Italian Marines. And we tried to prosecute them as, in our own courts, but that was not possible. Right. And so the issue went to the International Court of Justice. And from there, they decided that since this ship was in international waters, so the case had to be tried in the Italian courts. Right. So first, the most important, the most significant aspect is having jurisdiction. The other aspect, I think, what we need to keep in mind also is that several of these countries which are federal states, like the United States, like Switzerland, like Australia, which are federal countries, if these countries accept any international law, it automatically comes into their domestic legislation. Absolutely. India is not one of those countries. India has to pass a specific law. For instance, what we are discussing today in the WTO, whatever might be decided, we will have to pass a bill in our own parliament to make it a part of our own legal system. Right. Similar is the case as far as this anti-piracy maritime law is concerned. So this, I think, is a very important element. You mentioned about the international cooperation. Yes. That is a very important element. This is a part of the bill which has been explained by Honorable Mr. Chaudhary and Admiral Shekhar Sinha. And I think here it is because all these actions are taking place on the high seas. Absolutely. As far as the UN Convention on Law of the Sea 1982 is concerned, they have made changes. They have made subsequent changes to bring piracy onto the board as far as UNCLOS 1982 is concerned. So, but with all these countries, how if there are pirates caught on the high seas, can we extradite them from one country to the other? Yes, sir. So that we have to be in constant touch with the different countries to whom these pirates might belong. There are, if there are ships like this, can they be impounded? So I think there is a general agreement that needs to be arrived at with other countries. As far as India is concerned, it becomes very important because more than 80% of our foreign trade comes through the seas. So whether it is trade or it is people, as Admiral Sinha was just mentioning, that our people have been caught on the high seas. So how do we extricate them? How do we get...
Yes, sir. That's a very important point that you're making, sir. And I'd also request you to throw light on that in just subsequent questions,
Sure,
sir.
sure.
But Mr. Chaudhary, countries such as USA, Australia, Italy and Sri Lanka, they also have very strict maritime laws. But of course, they do not provide for death penalty. So the committee examined this bill in detail. What are the other best global practices that we can incorporate in this particular bill?
Yes, this is a very, very pertinent question. In fact, this United USA, Australia, Sri Lanka and Italy, they don't have the provision for death penalty in their this law made by them. That is a domestic law. But we have provided it. We have examined the law made by them very specifically. And this point was debated before the committee vigorously. And all the members, then we have unanimously decided, finally, that because we needed this law, reason being the privacy itself is a crime. And if the pirate commits the death, then it is a double crime. So question is, so that's why we have provided it. And I think this issue was not examined by these countries in this perspective. So that's why we have retained this provision only on this basis. So this, and secondly, if you don't provide such a deterrent punishment, so when you are dealing with the pirates and this law made by us is compatible with the law made by the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea, where it provided that the domestic law is required to be made. Otherwise, we shall not in position to prosecute and punish. You can try certain cases, even in the with respect to the high sea, if it happens on the vessels, because that is as good as it may be this vessel in the high sea, it is belong to a particular nation. And in view of the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea, that domestic law is required to be enacted, reason being the Supreme Court observed that since the definition of the piracy is not, the word piracy is not defined in the Indian Penal Code, this is the reason that law is required to be enacted and it to be dealt accordingly. So that's why on the issue of the death penalty, you have rightly pointed out these countries have not provided, but looking to the seriousness of the issue, because when we are dealing with the high sea and this question of this nature of the crime committed, then certain deterrent punishment is required to be provided.
Absolutely, sir. But another aspect, of course, Admiral Sinha, that we're talking about, as you also mentioned, about terrorist groups. Now, the United Nations guidelines on international law on piracy state that in addition to criminalizing the direct conduct of piracy, it is also important that all modes of participation are also criminalized. So how do we combat any kind of organized crime?
I would say that, the law has really taken them into the loop. And if the investigating agency goes right up to the root of, who was conducting, who was guiding, who was paying, who was the beneficiary, you will find that more often than not, it will lead to some terrorist group, which is actually looking for these kind of loose money, which they get as ransom in case it is a hijacking, and that is being used to fund some of the terrorist groups which are internationally known. So I think that as Ambassador Sajjanhar was mentioning, we have extradition treaty with many countries. Also, these days you will find that in all bilateral agreements of India, at least for last 6-7 years, the maritime security aspect is always included in the part of one of the clauses in the bilateral agreements, and invariably they will include the terrorism and counter-terrorism cooperation as far as maritime, the environment is concerned. So I think that it's quite a comprehensive, bill at the moment, which will become an act. And I think that, other countries should take lesson that, Indian law, which is going to be promulgated soon, after it sees the Parliament cleared by both the houses and goes for assent of the Honorable President.
Right.
And this will become a model sort of law for everybody else to follow.
Absolutely, it will be a model law. But Ambassador Sajjanhar, before I take questions from our audience here, your quick comment on expediting extradition.
Yeah, I think, we have been quite successful in recent years in getting our people extradited from different places. Of course, challenges still remain because the whole process of extradition is a very extremely complex and legal process. I've handled these cases when I was both in Geneva, when I was in Brussels, when I was in Washington, and the sort of paperwork and the documentation that has to be submitted, even when we have an extradition treaty with another country, that is quite lengthy, that is quite time consuming. So I think countries really need to get together because it is in the interest of every country that piracy on the high seas is controlled. Because we can see that it is not only in terms of piracy, but as the other panelists have also mentioned, it could also be for terrorism.
True.
And today we see, whether it is nuclear material, whether it is warheads, there are millions of tons of oil that is being transported over the high seas. And if there is, some sort of a terrorist attack on some of these tankers, the sort of environmental damage that it could lead to, I think that would be horrendous. That is even difficult to contemplate. So I think here we need to work together, exactly, Kriti, what you were mentioning earlier, in terms of international cooperation. And India today is in a very good position because, our relations with most of the countries around the world are very positive, very strong. And whether it is Indian Ocean, whether it is the Indo-Pacific, because this is the area, as you've been mentioning, whether it is the Gulf of Aden, you mentioned it yourself, the coast of Somalia, the Malacca Straits, I think these are the areas where the pirates have been operating. So I think a special responsibility devolves upon the shoulders of India that we take this step forward. And as has been mentioned now by the committee, the Ministry of External Affairs should take it forward because it is, India would be setting an example. India would be giving a lead to the whole world.
Absolutely, sir. On that positive note, let's take some questions from our audience here. Please go ahead, introduce yourself and speak your mind.
जैसे कि आपने बताया कि ये बिल कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है और कितने मलेशिया और इंडिया ऐसे कंट्री हैं जहाँ सबसे ज़्यादा क्राइम होता है, तो मैं ये जानना चाहती हूँ कि इतने बड़े इम्पोर्टेंट बिल को इतना टाइम कैसे लग गया आते बिल को पास करते करते?
देखिए,
That's a tough one, Ambassador.
Well, not exactly all that tough one because I think this is how the systems operate. परंतु देखिए, हमको ये याद रखना होगा जब 2009 में आया तब इसका महत्व बहुत ज़्यादा था क्योंकि जैसे कृति जी ने अभी बताया, जो उस समय जो पायरेसी के इंस्टेंसेस थे, सो ऑफ द कोस्ट ऑफ सोमालिया, गल्फ ऑफ एडन वगैरह वगैरह में, वो काफ़ी ज़्यादा बढ़ गए थे। परंतु 2009 में वहाँ पर से पारित हुआ, 2012 में आया लोकसभा में, परंतु वो फिर लोकसभा जब रद्द हो गई, उसका कार्यकाल समाप्त हो गया 2014 में, तो बिल लैप्स कर गया और इसको अब दोबारा से नई पार्लियामेंट में, नई लोकसभा में इसको लाया गया 2019 में। और जैसे अभी चौधरी साहब ने बताया, जो 2021 में पिछले साल उनकी जो भी रिकमेंडेशंस थी, जैसे डेथ पेनल्टी को वहाँ से हटा देना है और भी जो रिकमेंडेशंस हैं, इंटरनेशनल कोऑपरेशन को बढ़ा देना है, तो ये सब करके वहाँ से अब पारित हुआ है 2021 में। और मैं बिल्कुल उम्मीद करता हूँ जो अब आगे चलते हुए, क्योंकि इसके ऊपर बातचीत हो रही है, काफ़ी ज़्यादा इसके ऊपर ध्यान दिया जा रहा है, जो कुछ समय में इसको ज़रूर पारित किया जाएगा। और जैसे हम सभी बात कर रहे हैं, पैनलिस्ट बात कर रहे हैं, इट विल रियली सर्व एज अ टेम्पलेट for other countries also to go forward and tackle this issue in this manner.
So it will be a syntax for the other countries as well. Let's take another question now.
How we can ensure mutual cooperation among other countries so that handing over of the culprits or the who are doing this piracy can be done, and or do we need a universal law by UN or some other body?
In fact, under clause 14 of this bill, the piracy itself has been treated as an extraditable offense. There is no need of further. So this the convention state, now we have used the word other states. So the other states, in view of the United Nations Convention of the Law of Sea, they are required to all the parties to that law. Almost most of the countries are there. So in 1982, it was signed and it was ratified by the India in 1995. So all the states are required under that law. And if the domestic law, compatible law is there, since the United Nations law on Convention on High Sea is there, and in compatible to it, we have framed this law, this Maritime Anti-Piracy Bill. So in accordance with this, if in our country, in domestic law, we have treated this piracy as an extraditable offense. This is very important. So offense itself is extraditable. There is no need of treaty with the convention state. So all the states on the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea who signed the treaty in 1982, that is automatically, it is without any agreement to that effect. They are required to extradite that person in accordance with the law made by our country.
Absolutely, sir. And I'm completely out of time on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Chaudhary, Ambassador Sajjanhar and Admiral Sinha. Next week, we'll return with incisive analysis of another important bill. Till then, take care and stay tuned to Sansad TV. Namaskar.
Thank you.